Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your boy, Atypical Security Guard Damian Bunting, here with another Observe and Report podcast. Today, we're going to be welcoming a special guest, but as always, I want to welcome you guys to the show. Remember, the entire reason why we have this platform, why we do these shows, why I come on here at all, it's to help educate, motivate, train, and inform new and willing to learn security guards. But with that, we cannot deviate from the fact that we have so many things within our society that play into what we do. It plays into what we do on a political scale, and then also, our ability to protect ourselves. Those of us who have chosen to do this for a career, we are walking the path of a sheepdog, a protector. And as a protector, as a sheepdog, some of the things that we have to talk about specifically in this day and age are things like the Second Amendment, gun rights, anti-gun legislation groups. And today we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be bringing in a very special guest here in a second. Before we go any further, a little bit of housekeeping. Remember, download the Security Guard Training Academy app. You can find the Security Guard Network app on iOS and Google Play, anywhere that you can find apps for your phone. Remember, this is a training academy app that gives you access to so much needed information that is so much lacking in our community. Guys, if you can be a part of that, download that and support what we are doing, I would truly appreciate it. Our guest today is going to be Alisha Overstreet. She is an advocate here in the state of Oregon. Most recently, I have interacted with her in terms of things like Measure 114 and some of the House bills that are up that are looking to strip Oregonians, hardworking, law-abiding Oregonians, of their right to self-protection. We're going to bring her in. Alisha, how are you today?
Hi, I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing great. We were talking a little bit off camera that you didn't always start out with gun advocacy, excuse me, as your primary focus. You've done some other things, some things specific to those in your family. If you can just give everybody a little brief introduction as to who you are and then how we got to this point where we're having this conversation. I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, I appreciate you having me today. My name's Alisha Overstreet, and I actually started out in advocacy more in terms of public health, and I, yeah, it actually started with my husband. He's a combat veteran, and when he was medically discharged from the military or from the army, I had to support him in kind of navigating the VA and fighting with the VA. Later on, we started to, have to navigate special education for one of our kids. And somehow I went and started to just get involved in a lot of public health advocacy and in terms of sitting on committees. In between there, a little bit of sprinkle of, Second Amendment stuff, but not really to the point where I am right now. So yeah, that's somehow I maneuvered into this area.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people find themselves kind of evolving into an advocacy space. If you make the decision that you're going to carry a firearm, or you're going to get into firearms, or even have a firearm for personal protection in the home, ultimately, I think there's this misconception that the vast majority of law-abiding citizens, that they just go out and grab a gun, all willy-nilly, and that there's no thought process behind it. There's a big push politically for all types of things like training and storage and registration. But, when you make the decision, and again, we're talking about law-abiding citizens. This is different from your average person that, has nefarious, thought process or whatever. But when you make that decision as a law-abiding citizen, we don't take that lightly. And I think that people fail to realize what goes into making the decision to have that firearm in your home, or to have that firearm around your family. And so when you do this, a large part of that, it kind of evolves into you being aware of gun rights legislation or restrictions, things like that. And then you find that there's so many people that are advocating to take away gun rights, and there's fewer people that are advocating for you to, maintain your gun rights, or definitely to expand those gun rights. So a lot of the people that you find that end up getting into advocacy for the Second Amendment, they're just people that want to be left alone and be able to protect themselves and their family. But there's not a lot of people that are out there to speak for us. So you end up becoming, in a very, crazy way, you end up becoming the own voice, to speak for your special interests. Have you found that to be true?
Yes, actually. And it's funny because before I met my husband, uh, I really was not necessarily into, firearms. I was just, it wasn't anything that really came up, in our family. Um, I, the closest that I've ever kind of really gotten to anything with firearms whenever I was younger was, um, in high school, and ROTC, because I went to a military high school in Germany, and that was pretty much it. That's all I knew. Um, and then there was this class that I took in community college. It was a U.S. government class, and the professor asked us, so do you think that there's a reason why the Constitution is written the way it's written? And at that point in time, I was like in this mindset of, well, yeah, I mean, they couldn't have ever expected that, we would have all these, guns and internet and, all these things. They would have never envisioned it, right? So similar to what we're hearing right now, in terms of the argument that's happening. And whenever I met my husband, he's he's just this white guy from the South. He's from Texas, and he was in the military, and he was just like, well, have you ever even shot a gun? And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Like, why would I need that, right? And so he was the one who then introduced me, and he was like, okay, these are all these things that you should that you really need to be careful about, all the safety steps and all the things. And it was just I was like, oh, okay, isn't so bad. So then as we moved along, throughout the years, I started to learn more about Black history. And then within the last 2 years or so, I started to learn about the importance of the Second Amendment and self-defense and the lawful use of firearms had for the civil rights movement.
I before you go down that road, one of the questions that I wanted to start off with was, what was your introduction to firearms? And you said that this was, kind of the proxy relationship that you have with your husband. And you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting. You said, my husband is a white guy from the South, and he's a military guy. And you also mentioned something else that I thought was interesting, because there's so many parallels in our path to this point where we are right now. And you know we're just gonna have a very frank conversation today, okay? So your husband being a white guy from the South, I'll be 45 next month. I don't know how old you are. I'm assuming that we're somewhere close in, relatively close in age range, but you know it's been in the last 3 to 4 years where it's become apparent to me how different and diverging the paths are in terms of firearm ownership within our community and the white community. It dawned on me a couple of years ago that, all of my friends, I grew up in Arkansas, all of my friends, when they're 4, 5, 6 years old, their dads are taking them out and they're training them on a BB gun. They're training them on a 22. And when the fathers go to the gun store or the gun range, they take their sons with them. And as they walk into this gun store with this 4-year-old, this 5-year-old, They introduce him to the guy that's behind the counter. They say, look, Billy, that's Steve. You see Steve? Steve's a good man. I was in the military with Steve. Steve's a retired police officer. And anytime that we need to get firearms or we need to get ammunition or we need anything, you're going to come to Steve, right? And the little kid says, yeah, Dad. And then Steve comes out from the back and he goes, let me show you something. And he shows him a 22 rifle and he shows him how to load it. And they talk about safety. And as that kid gets older, as he becomes a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old, and they go through Boy Scouts, and the father takes the kid on hunting trips around other men, and they teach him about firearm safety, and they teach him about muzzle loaders and the entire history of everything that goes along with firearm ownership, till the one day where this kid is 10, 11, 12 years old, and he goes out hunting to shoot his first deer. Mm-hmm. And his father talks about the importance of a clean kill, where that shot placement has to go, the importance of that firearm to feeding their family. Mm-hmm. And then as they're coming home, the father tells that kid, it's not just about what we did here today, son. I want you to understand everything that's led up to this point. It's not just about what we did today in shooting that deer. That same process of where you got your firearm, where you got your ammunition, talking to the guy behind the counter, all of that, to going out today, to being with me and your uncle and your grandpa, and all of the stories you've heard about the war, all the stories you've heard about everything that's going on in the world, and you taking that shot, son, today when you killed that deer, I want you to understand something. You're ready. And what you're ready for is, God forbid somebody come through that gate to hurt your mom or hurt your sister or hurt your brother. The same thing that you did today, you take those same skills and you apply it to protecting your home. That's the path that almost every single white young male that I grew up with walked down.
Yep.
Every one of them.
Yeah.
Now, conversely, on the other side of that, my family, they grew up, my parents both graduated from segregated schools. My mom actually, in the last 2 years of high school, they integrated the schools in Arkansas. So when people look at the civil rights footage of the Little Rock Nine that is integrating Central High School, like, my parents know some of those people. Mm-hmm. Like, my dad went to the last segregated high school in Arkansas, and it's located, miles away from Central High. My mom goes into her sophomore year into the integrated North Little Rock High School. So when I'm a kid and all of my white friends are going down that path, the path that I'm walked down is, under no circumstances do you have a gun around you at any given time. Mm-hmm. End of discussion. No training, no hunting, no anything. And I have friends that say, I know Black people that grew up that are the same age as you, and they didn't have that experience. Well, a lot of those people didn't live first generation separated from Jim Crow. So for my parents, when they were kids, when they were younger, they didn't have that access because it wasn't written in the books literally that Blacks could not have firearms. But de facto, there was a ban on Blacks owning firearms, because if you owned a firearm in the South, in Arkansas, in the 50s, in the 40s, in the 30s, that could lead to you being killed. And when I say killed, I mean lynched. Like, this is the reality of our history. So for me, being that first generation Black kid in middle America, my parents could never even imagine putting me in a situation where they gave me access to firearms. Now, there was many people that wasn't the case, but for my family specifically, that was not the case, and that wasn't the path that I walked down. So it's not lost on me when you say, at whatever age you are, respectfully, that it was later in life that someone looked at you and said, what do you mean you never shot a gun? Like, this is what we do. And it is what we do, but it's not what we do in our culture. And it's so painful to learn about this, because we walk through our life just either the Black experience is one of a complete hands-off approach to firearms, or You go down the other path with the hyper masculinity of gang violence, and that's the first time that these firearms are introduced to our youth. So I go on that rant to say that when we talk about the passage of legislation, this is why it's so important. And I think I'm hoping that the majority of the white people that are in the legislative process, the majority of white people that are involved in anti-gun legislation, I'm hoping that they're ignorant of this pass, that they're not doing this specifically because it is going to put our people, our young people, in the path to being federally, locked up on a felony charge for a lot of the things that they're trying to pass. Let me bring it down here. I'm starting to get upset here. Sorry.
No, I hear that.
I'm sorry. I'm going on a rant here. Please jump in.
Absolutely hear that, and that is one of the things where I have gotten so frustrated, because let me tell you this. I actually went down to the Capitol, right, in Salem, and I said, look, there is, I have done a lot of, kind of exploring over the last couple of years, and I have learned so much about my history, or as a Black woman, in our communities, in terms of that ownership of firearms. Like, we were never told that Black folks have this rich history of firearm ownership, right? And I went down there and I said, look, read this book. This is an amazing book. And it's called Negroes with Guns, or with the Gun.
Keep talking.
Or Negroes and the Gun, I'm sorry. And it talks about all the amazing people that we have. Oh, you got it too. Love it. Yep. I love that. And it's such a, like, there's so many things in that book where I'm just like, I didn't know, right? And then there's another one that I found, and I don't know if you have this one. It says, "This nonviolent stuff will kill you."
Keep talking.
Love it. So I went down there and I talked to them about it, and they were just like, "Oh, that's nice." Yes. I said, so their reaction was either, "Oh yeah, that's nice. Thank you for coming," or it was complete crickets. Like, they made sure that the people that are sitting in the office, or in their office, are gatekeepers to make sure that I don't get to speak with the representative or the senator. Or there was crickets in terms of, nobody replied to my emails, or they essentially took jabs at me in public meetings or hearings.
How so? What do you mean?
So, and the funny thing here is that they didn't necessarily like say my name, but there are certain things that I had brought up where it is very clear that because I was the only Black woman that testified against 348, or SB 348. And so you had certain people from Lift Every Voice Oregon come in a public hearing and say, and mind you, this was another Black woman who said that something along the lines of, I am from, or my family is from, the first real civil rights movement, the nonviolent civil rights movement, with MLK, and I practice, his principles of nonviolence, and I'm like,
here we go.
Really? Do you also know that MLK was shot down by the FBI, and he didn't get his CHL that he asked for because his house was bombed, right? He was denied it. And so I want to say that people are ignorant, yes, However, when you have somebody coming into your office and saying, look, what you're doing, somebody who looks like me, right, and saying, hey, I have a master's degree in forensic psychology. I have, I've been doing advocacy for ages now. And I know from being in the public health space that what you're doing right now, trying to pass these bills, is not going to work, because we still don't have fully funded schools. We don't have safe recreational options for our kids, and either in the inner city or out in rural areas. We don't have, mentorship programs and all these things that they keep talking about that they want to have, but every time it comes up to um, on their desk, it's on the chopping block. We don't have money for that. Right. So, so whenever I went, and there's one particular representative that I went to whom I thought would be an ally. And after, I think it was either the second time that I tried to speak with her, it was very clear that she just did not care. And as soon as I mentioned that, asked, why would you vote to pass something like this when it is your community that's going to be affected the most by this, right? And we know it's going to be rendered unconstitutional, or at least we're going to, there's going to be lawsuits coming. We know that because everybody's already said that. So why are you voting for this? Why can you not put your vote towards something else that will actually help, our communities? And it was more of a, oh, okay, cool, thank you, and here's the door.
Well, ultimately, here in Oregon, I mean, I'm assuming that this is happening across the board, but Oregon just gets their marching orders from the Democratic National Convention. They're told what to do. They're told what to pass. They're told what to put forth. And the people that are in those positions, they just absolutely just walk lockstep and do as they're told. This conversation that we're having, this dialogue that we're having, the things that we're bringing up, they don't care. They don't care to have this conversation, because on the surface of what we're talking about, there's you'd be hard pressed to validate or quantify why you would enact something like some of the legislation that we're dealing with here in Oregon if your desire is not to harm BIPOC, right? Black, indigenous people of color. I hear that term all the time. But when a Black person brings up a situation like this and wants to speak to a representative, there's not an opportunity. Now, meanwhile, if I was a high school kid with no life experience whatsoever, if I wanted to talk about gun rights and gun ownership, they would hand walk me down the Senate floor. They'd give me a seat at the table and they'd say, the floor is yours, 30 minutes. What do you want to talk about? Right? But someone who, like myself, I fought for my country. I bled for my country. I protect my community. I'm a law-abiding, tax-paying, a lot of taxes, tax-paying citizen. I can't even get a sit at the table. I don't have to ask for a seat at the table, because I'm very, very good at kicking the door in myself and making opportunities for people to listen to me. But it's shameful that we're in a situation where, we have people in our government here in Oregon that their entire platform, in terms of what they run on and what they advocate for and what they preach and what they talk about, it's all about supposedly rectifying wrongs to our people. But here we are in a situation where we're talking about a systemic wrong, and we're talking about the wrongs that are going to come along with some of the passages of these bills, and no one wants to talk to us. We've gotten so far into the meat of what I wanted to talk to that we really have not followed my outline here. But let me ask you this. Let's take a step back from the racial implications of what we're talking about. I do want to ask you this question from a female perspective. How has ownership or getting into the Second Amendment, how has it shaped your outlook on self or personal protection? Let me ask you that.
Oh, um, that's kind of been a tough one for me because I haven't really for the longest time. I just didn't even think about it. Right. It wasn't a thing where I was like, I am terrified to walk, down the street or whatever. So I did not think about it. Um, and then I, it, and then at some point it was like, okay, my husband said, well, you know what, we should probably go or you mainly should probably go get your CHL because there might be times where I'm not there, um and I can't protect you. And we have two kids, and uh, I mean, I've had so many uh things or situations where yeah, I was scared, and then it just kind of like left my mind and I didn't even think about it. And there's one particular time, I think it was like 18 or so, um and I was walking home and it was already dark, and there's this car that was following me, um and the only reason why I think I got out of that was I just got lucky. And this was in Germany, and I didn't have access to firearms there or anything like that. So I couldn't even if I wanted to protect myself at that point in time with a firearm, I never had the chance. I wouldn't have had the chance to. Um, so then when my husband said, like, there's going to be times when I'm not going to be there and you have to, you're with our kids, and he always says, I know you're a really strong woman, but I mean, uh, there's you're gonna have to protect yourself at potentially at some point in time. And so that's kind of how that started to happen. And I took the course for the CHL, and got it, and I've been carrying um, ever since.
Yeah, yeah. I think that for a lot of people, never having been in a situation, I guess it's easy if you were to ever be attacked or robbed or assaulted. If someone were to say, hey, you were in that situation, if you would have had a firearm and you felt comfortable having that firearm, would you have used it to protect yourself? I think most people would say yes. But absent having an actual situation that has happened to you, most people don't see the necessity of what comes with carrying a firearm every day. I have a beautiful wife, and she's a sweet woman, and she's a great woman. And I've always talked to people and said that when you're talking to the average person about self-protection, personal protection, I always talk about this bridge, how the most difficult thing is to get people to walk across this bridge of acceptance. And the acceptance is that the police, no matter how amazing they are, no matter how dedicated to the community they are, no matter how much they observe their oath of protection, they can't be there in the exact moment that something happens, right? And
Right.
I think getting people to walk across this bridge, that if the police are the only people that are there to protect me, if they can't be there in the exact moment that I need them, what do I do then? Well, then you say, well, now it's your responsibility. You have to be your own first responder. And I think that most people look at that and go, well, I'm not a cop and I'm not a soldier and I don't have any martial arts training. So, in order for me to do what the cops would have to do if they were going to be there, that's too much of an undertaking. And then you start talking about, carrying a firearm. Well, where would I carry it? How do I wear it? Like, what do I have to do? Well, you have to do training for this. And okay, well, knowing the laws or the statutes of where you can carry, when you start talking about all of the intricacies and the idiosyncrasies that go along with gun ownership and being a responsible person that carries that firearm, I think most people look at it and it's just too daunting of a task. It's like telling someone, hey, Why don't you go back to school and get your doctorate? Most people go, that's insane. I don't have time for it. I don't have the money for it. But the fact that people look at the responsibility of gun ownership or carrying a firearm or being responsible for protecting your own life via possibly having to take someone else's, the fact that people look at that as being too daunting of a task does not negate the fact that the danger is still there.
Right.
Whether you prepare for the danger or not, the danger is potentially still coming. Now, you can play the odds that the danger never knocks on your door, right? But if it does, and you're prepared, you have one possibility of outcome. If it does, and you're not prepared, you have a more probable possibility of outcome. So, getting people to understand that has been the most difficult thing as someone who cares and wants people to be safe in their own, their own personal selves. And when I say that, I mean that mostly for my wife, because she said something to me once and it broke my heart. I have been trying for years to get her to conceal carry. I've been trying for years to get her to train on a firearm. I've been trying for years to get her to take this seriously. And she said to me in conversation, if someone were to assault me and rape me, she said that if someone were,
It's hard.
she said that if someone were to rape her, that has to be God's will, and that she would just have to accept that because she couldn't see herself carrying a firearm everywhere. And I thought to myself, like, how have you been so indoctrinated to think that that's an okay option
It,
when something so easily could stop that situation from happening?
right. And I hear that on so many levels. And as a woman, I will say that it's a there's so many things that we navigate, right? There are so many things that are coming at us. And I cannot, oh my gosh, my heart breaks. Because that should not be our first like response, right? But as a society, I think yeah, as a society, women have largely been kind of just told just to take it, right? Whether that is, you know, as you're working your way up the corporate ladder, or if you're speaking out about something. So it, we we have for the longest time just been told just take it. um and for your wife to feel that way, like it breaks my heart. And I have heard other women say the same thing or very similar things. And I will say that I maybe it's just my stubbornness where I'm like, I'll be damned. Right? Like, you and whose army.
But that's, we live in a state where more than almost any other state, like female empowerment and a woman's right, a woman like one of the
It's only a woman's right if it is in line with what the majority or the perceived majority is telling you a woman's right is.
right.
And that is what bothers me so much, is that it's it, as a female, I should be able to and whether you consider yourself a trans female or biological female, any of those things, as a female, I should be able to protect myself and not feel bad about it, right? I should not have to feel guilty that I want to protect myself from someone who could potentially kidnap my child, someone who could potentially kidnap me, or, as we see in the news all the time, be a victim of a mass shooting. Like, at the very least, if I go down to the grocery store and somebody comes in and wants to commit murder in a grocery store, right? At the very least, I would like to be able to have that chance to protect myself and not feel guilty about it. And I think for a lot of us women, it is that constant idea and kind of bombardment of all the things that we're supposed to be doing as a woman, as a mother, as a wife, as a, whatever. And I think that is where, where I wish that I could, or we as females or women could have a stronger bond in terms of, let's go meet up at the range, right? Let's go do this. Even if all we're doing is just sitting there and watching other women do it. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know how to bridge that. But
to me, like all of what we're talking about, it flows into every question that I was going to ask you, because the main proponents of those who are pushing for anti-gun legislation, the main proponents of those who are trying to advocate for the removal of the ability to protect ourselves, for women to protect themselves. Look, if you are against the patriarchy, if you think that men are toxic, if you think that men ain't shit, okay, I'll give you that. What about the women? So for everyone that is advocating for a woman's right to choose, for a woman to be respected, for a woman to have, autonomy over her body, does that not include not being assaulted and having every opportunity in the moment that it happens? We're not talking about the ability to prosecute and hold men accountable for what they have done. That is one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is to stop the motherfucker before it happens.
Yeah.
So what about the women in that situation? In the instance when that man or that person is trying to assault them and they have the legal right to protect themselves, protect their bodies, to have autonomy over their being. What about them? So to those people who are advocating against gun ownership, who are advocating against the ability to personally protect yourself in and everywhere within any space that you're in, what about the women then? And so how do you, as a woman yourself, as a woman who has taken the responsibility to protect yourself, protect your family, how do you reconcile everything that you're talking about? Because you are advocating for a woman's right to choose. You're advocating for a woman's right to body autonomy. You're advocating for a woman to be able to protect herself. But the people that are on the other side of the equation, it's not the patriarchy, it's not the guys, it's women. How do you reconcile those two things where you're fighting for something that so many other women, specifically here in Oregon, groups like Moms Demand Action, Everytown, how do you reconcile the fact that women are advocating for their own potential destruction or assault? Your thoughts? We having church today, just so you know. So we're doing that.
I am definitely feeling it. Man. So I will say that, okay, so just a couple weeks ago, I was at the at the Capitol again, where they had the hearing for HB 2005, which that's a whole other thing that we should probably have a conversation about. But anyway, so I showed up there with my lovely shirt, and it said "All gun control is racist," and I got to sit next to Hillary Ulick, I believe is her name. She's the chapter head for Moms Demand Action here in Oregon. And it is interesting to see, because when I saw all the Moms Demand Action moms come in, most of them were these middle-aged white women, and I remember some of them from their testimonies that they've done kind of over the last few weeks or months. And most of them are from like the suburb, right? Like the nice, beautiful, safe suburbs where you really don't have to worry about much. Now, I'm not saying that there is no crime out there either, and that, so that's not what I'm saying. But I think if you are kind of in this bubble of relative safety and you really don't kind of expand yourself out into, other areas, and have no inclination to learn about other areas, it's probably very easy to fall into that trap of, I am worried about this violence that I see in the inner city to come my way, and I don't want that happening, so therefore everybody just needs to get rid of their guns. I don't know how to get through to them in terms of, or through to anybody who's like that deeply entrenched. And I don't think you will, or anyone will. So I don't. It's
almost the answer is there is no answer.
There is no answer, really. Yeah, I think right now, the only, and it's really hard. I will say that, because I mean, I was even I was walking in the hallway, and there was one of the Moms Demand Action women came up, and she said, just kind of passive aggressively, "Oh, I like your shirt," and I'm like, "Oh, well, thank you," right? And I was just like, whatever. So let's just I'm just such a cynical person anyway. So I'm like, okay, thank you. And as I was trying to keep walking, but she commenced to turn around and say, "Oh, I'm pretty sure we can just like agree that everybody in this country is racist, right?" But it's not the way, or what she said. It's the way that she said it. Like, it was in this kind of like aggressive manner, in terms of like the way that I interpret it was more in terms of well, how dare you call us out? Right? How dare you do that? I am here to try to help you.
Right.
And it's so demeaning when you have another woman tell you that you are, essentially not a good mom because you are trying to protect yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Or you are carrying a firearm, and therefore you're not a good mom. But I'm like, wait a minute. I am, learning a lot. I am teaching myself. I'm going out, and I'm, I mean, I would much rather go down to the range than sit here and have to talk about Moms Demand Action, or talk about the fact that gun control is racist and is historically rooted in racism. And none of the people that, are passing these laws are actually wanting to listen to it. Right? Or the media is just not picking it up. The media is just like, nah, it's okay. Nah, let's not talk about it. Right?
I'll figure it out.
I mean, I would much rather be down at the range, than having
we've hit on the fact that moms demand action is one of the major driving forces behind a lot of this legislation. And let's be clear, they are a front. Moms demand action is a front for the Democratic Party. Mike Bloomberg funds Moms Demand Action,
Yeah.
as well as almost every other major anti-gun organization. And what the Democrats like to do, and I'm not a Republican. I've always voted Democrat up until this last election. I actually got to meet Bill Clinton when I was in the military. I was on a nuclear program, and the first time that it was ever used in combat. So I was one of 6 people that got to have an audience with the president, got to meet Bill Clinton in 98. I'm from Arkansas. My dad worked on Clinton's political campaign in 92. He was my governor, all through junior high and high school. So, I have never considered myself a Republican. So when I say this, I'm not saying this to be disparaging. It's just facts. So the Democratic Party, very anti-gun, would like to see a majority of people be disarmed. And I knew, during COVID, when you had a large contingent of people that labeled themselves patriots, people that were Trump supporters, that were protesting the lockdowns, people that were protesting the elections, and they're going out there and they're standing there with their AR-15s. I'm like, yeah, this is what they're going to ready to come after. This gave them a perfect opportunity to paint, that side as extremists. And then all it takes is a couple school shootings. And unfortunately, we live in a country where you have close to 400 million people. You have over 400 million guns in circulation. So, you have a large contingent of people with mental illness, a large contingent of people that are just angry, a lot of men that are unhappy, and people are going to lash out. And so that stuff plays directly into this desire to disarm people. I did want to ask you, as we talk about Moms Demand Action, one of the things that we've seen a lot recently here in the Portland area is these groups being able to mobilize high school age and middle school age children. So the ability for Moms Demand Action or Lift Every Voice Oregon, any anti-gun legislation group, to be able to get a large number of school kids to either walk out of school or to go and be a part of protests that they're at. You see these kids at large scale protests. The news is there. Moms Demand Action is handing out signs. My question to you, as a mother, as a woman who cares about women in general, how do we as gun owners make our case for the importance of the Second Amendment to this future generation? Because as I see it, we're about one voting generation away from really being very close to seeing this being, stripped from the Constitution. People think that that's not possible, but when you look at the people that are in our legislative government now, Joe Biden, what's he, 83, 84? I don't know how old he is, but he's up there in age, right? So the people that are actually in our legislative government that, and when I say Joe Biden, I'm talking about his age, not his political leanings, but the people that are in position that still believe that the Constitution is the founding bedrock of our nation, those people are aging out. My son is 25. He's in grad school. My youngest daughter is 16. I don't think that they're even talking about the Constitution in school. And if they are, they're talking about it in terms of negative ways. I don't think within the next 10, 15, 20 years, as our current legislators age out, die off, and you have more 22, 23 to 30-year-olds that come in, and then that next generation behind them, they're being indoctrinated and they don't believe in the Second Amendment. They see it as a negative. I think that we are in grave danger of having that stripped away from us. So how do we combat that? Or are we in a situation where we can't? What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm not a believer of, not being able to change or not. let me rephrase that. I've always been an optimist. I've been a realistic optimist. However, I think, and as bad as this might sound, but I think places like Moms Demand Action take advantage of our kids and our youth who are just, they're scared. And I mean, that's normal. It's a normal reaction to these traumatic events that are being plastered all over the media, right? So our kids are scared, they're terrified, and they see that they're not really getting a lot of the support that they need, right? So we in Oregon, I mean, we're like dead last in mental health access. We're just about dead last in education. We are, and it doesn't matter how much money we're throwing at this, right? But our kids are terrified. So I think they are taken advantage of their fear. I don't know if it is kind of this willful indoctrination, but I do get the sense that they're taking advantage of them. And I think a couple of things that we can do would be, as parents, family members, all those, friends or whatever, we need to go back to having conversations with our kids. And you mentioned earlier at the very beginning of our conversation about how there's this dichotomy or this difference between the way that like black families see gun ownership, or the way that we've been raised, kind of as a generalization, compared to how like how white families do it with their kids, right? And maybe that's what it takes. So therefore, in order for that to happen, in order for families and dads and moms and parents and guardians to sit down with their kids and say, hey, look, this is the Bill of Rights, and this is important, and this is the reason why we are here today. And I hate to constantly go back to kind of this, this race thing, but one of the comments that we keep hearing is that, well, we are in, the year 2023. We don't have to worry about tyranny. We don't have to worry about, any of that stuff. And what I say is, well, I beg to differ. And the reason for that is that we have an example of tyranny within our own history right now, and relative recent history, actually. Right? So if we're talking about tyranny, let's talk about the slave codes. Let's talk about the Black codes. Let's talk about Jim Crow, right? Let's talk about the fact that we have had colonies like Virginia and South Carolina, specifically putting, in regulations or in statutes that they, Negroes, mulattoes, and Indians shall never be able to own firearms, right? Let's talk about the fact that Dred Scott v. Sanford, one of the only reasons why, or one of the main reasons why, Judge Taney essentially said that no, Black people are not citizens and should never be citizens. Otherwise, and if they were, they would have the the constitutional right to essentially carry a firearm wherever they went, right? So if we can get people our age to listen and say, especially within the Black community, right? People at our age, to hear those points and to hear and see, because all we got to do is just open up a history book and say, look, I mean, I don't know what you call lynching close to 6,000 Black people, right, in this country in the 19th century, right? Because this is not like 1600s. This is like 1800 something to 1900 something, right? And we've only recently, 1964, right, is when we finally actually, things were put really in place to say that, yes, we are equal. And yes,
No,
we
I
are, right?
always make the distinction. I didn't put the picture up in the
Yeah.
the preparatory, but I always make the distinction that, matter of fact, hang on one second. Let me do this.
Uh-huh.
I always like to have this conversation with people for context.
Mm.
Going back to my old Instagram here. Just 1 second. So this is a picture of my father.
Mm-hmm.
You can barely see him there. He's a little
Yeah.
bit darker than I am. This is a picture of my gorgeous grandfather when he was
Oh,
in his 30s.
awesome.
This is a picture of my great grandfather. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
My great grandfather was the son of a slave. My great great grandfather was born in 1833 and he was emancipated in 1865. So he was 32 years old when he was emancipated.
Yeah.
My great grandfather, Israel, he died in 1981. I was born in 1978. The son of a slave held me.
Mm.
That's how close we are to something that so many people say was so long ago.
Yep.
The son of a slave held me.
Yeah.
My dad was 15 years old when legally on paper he became a full-fledged US citizen,
Mm.
right? The Civil Rights Act of 1964, that is the first time that Black people were legitimately on paper recognized as full-fledged citizens.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was 3 years away from graduating high school. That's not that long ago. And we talk about where Black gun ownership and how the indoctrination of our history has led to us willfully giving up our rights, right? And when I hear Black preachers and Black people within the church advocating for anti-gun legislation, and then weeks ago, Carolyn Bryant, the woman at the center of the Emmett Till situation that led to his being lynched. I'll never forget watching a documentary where they went to Mose Wright. Mose Wright was the great uncle of Emmett Till, who was watching over him while he was visiting in Mississippi. And when Carolyn Bryant and her piece of shit husband and his piece of shit best friend went to Mose Wright's home in the middle of the night and they knocked on the door and they stepped into that living room and they said, "Give us the boy from Chicago." There was no other alternative but to give the boy from Chicago to these three people because they didn't have the fucking right to have a firearm in their home.
Yeah.
To protect the life of that young Black boy. It wasn't legal. whether it was on paper or whether it was de facto or whether it was common law practice, it wasn't legal for them to have a firearm to protect their family.
Yeah.
And that young boy was fucking lynched. And that piece of shit, Carolyn Bryant, she got to live out the rest of her life until 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And then we have to sit here in the year 2023 and have white women just like her go onto the Senate and legislative floor and advocate for me to be in that same potential situation, to where someone in this city, the city of Portland, could walk into my house and do God knows what to me or my wife, because for the betterment of me and my own good, according to these people, I don't have the right to have a firearm to protect myself.
Yep.
And you and I can't even get a seat at the table to have this conversation.
Right.
And there is a level of wrong to that needs to be addressed. My local representative, I'm not sure who it is or what district I'm in, but these are the conversations that need to be had. How are you advocating for something in 2023 that led to the death of so many people? People want to invoke Martin Luther King. They want to talk about every single quote of nonviolence that Martin Luther King made. Well, let me tell you what Martin Luther King would have said if he was still here. Don't shoot me in the head.
Yeah.
Give me an opportunity to protect myself. Everything that he went through, everything that he advocated for, everything that he marched for, continually beaten, continually stoned, continually put in jail. And under no circumstances was he allowed to carry a firearm to protect himself. And at the end of the day, it cost him his life.
Right.
It cost him his life. It cost Medgar Evers his life. It cost Malcolm X his life. Mm-hmm. Black men that were not legally able to protect themselves. So I find it highly disrespectful and I find it highly insulting that the state of Oregon and that the people of Portland who are in leadership positions who advocate for the removal of people like you and me to be able to privately and personally protect ourselves and our family, that they would even have the balls to utter the words Black, Indigenous, people of color, because that is so insulting. It's a very emotional conversation for me, because people think that I'm advocating for gun rights because I somehow am like a gun nut. I'm not.
Right. And the whole thing is that like so the term gun rights, like in so many ways bothers me, really, because it's not the gun that has the right? It's not the gun that has, or the firearm that has the right to protect itself, or be used in a lawful manner, because the Second Amendment isn't necessarily just for self-protection. As long as I use it in a lawful manner, I should not have to be questioned or interrogated about it, right? Because I'm not committing a crime. But it's the continuous creation of crimes that makes it to where we have this disproportionate number of Black men or Black people in our correction system or justice system. I mean, in Oregon, we have Black people make up about 2% of the entire state of the population. Yet we have 9% are represented within the justice system. 9% of Black, within the incarceration numbers, it's 9% make up, or Black people make up 9% of the incarcerated. And I'm like, how is that even possible? Right? So by those numbers, and it goes all the way back to this idea that, A, minimum sentencing laws, and B, you have, laws like this where they just continue to create new things, and new felonies, new misdemeanors, and all those things, right? Even though we already have a whole bunch of laws that are on the books that they could be using.
Right.
Um,
And for anyone who's unaware of what we're talking about, let's be specific. So measure 114.
yeah.
114 specifically says that, I'm looking here. Now this, I would grab this one. This is a Oregon compliant 10 round magazine. Okay. Now under measure 114, if I were to have a standard capacity magazine for a Glock 19, which holds, I believe 16 rounds, 15, 16 rounds. Let's just say 16 rounds, right? Now, under measure 114, every magazine that you have that is out of compliance is a misdemeanor. But if you have 3 misdemeanors, that equals a felony. So for the majority of that 3% population in Oregon that is black, 3% population in Oregon that is black, that the high majority of those people didn't grow up like that kid I was talking about in the early conversation, where they're going to the gun range, they're going to the gun shop, they're taking all these classes with their father. Most black men or black women in Oregon who are carrying a firearm are one of 2 types of demographic: the illegal carrier of a firearm, and they're going to get dealt with in the justice system no matter what, right? Then you have the new carrier of firearms, which is of that demographic that purchased firearms for the first time in 2020 due to the pandemic and due to a lot of racial strife and due to a lot of political issues. Most of those people, they purchased their firearms legally, they got it, they took it home, and they put it in their drawer. Maybe they go to the range every now and then to shoot. Now, most of those people in that second demographic aren't following firearms blogs. They're not following 2A community YouTube channels. They're not out advocating for gun rights. They're not even aware of half the stuff that we're talking about. But guess what? Come whatever time that measure 114 goes into effect, when that law-abiding black man who purchased his firearm for the first time in 2020, that didn't grow up in the situation of learning that we talked about early, he's going to the range. He gets pulled over because he has a rear tail light that's out. And a police officer that has an axe to grind sees in the back seat that he has a firearm. And it's in a case. And he tells the guy, yeah, I'm getting ready to go down the threat dynamics. I'm going to do some shooting. Sir, do me a favor. Unbuckle your seatbelt. Get out of the car. Go stand next to my bumper. Don't move. Opens everything up. Finds 4 magazines in close proximity to the firearm that is in the back seat that he legally has purchased. That's 3 separate misdemeanors for each magazine. Now he has that 4th one. That's a felony. Now, most people who look at this will go, you go to court, you work it out, like that's never going to stick. Okay. But how many people have the money to fight for this situation? How many people in that situation, that story that I just painted, have the ability to advocate for themselves in court that they purchased those magazines before Measure 114 went out? They purchased those magazines before it went into effect, before, whatever other House bills passed. These are the type of things that can ensnare people into a legal system that they have no business being in by any fault of their own. Right. And it's not just something like that. There's all kinds of stuff they're trying to come up with that would put a law-abiding person, a law-abiding black person, since we're talking about this in terms of our cultural situation, this is the kind of stuff that pisses me off.
Yeah.
Amongst other things.
Yeah. And it's even worse when we're talking about things like, House Bill 2005, because House Bill 2005 has a provision in it that talks about where you can carry with a CHL. That one is the one that I'm really agitated about, because I go to the zoo with my kids a lot. Okay. So now Metro, Metro essentially runs the zoo. And they had testified in favor of, it was previously under a different House bill, but now it's wrapped up into House Bill 2005. And that one, it's essentially, it allows local municipalities and local government places or whatever to determine whether or not they would allow or they will allow people with a CHL to conceal carry. Okay. So now here's the thing, is that it's not just within public buildings or government buildings. They're talking about public buildings.
Right.
And adjacent grounds. So now the zoo, for example, just because you had a couple of idiots who decided that, they need to open carry and then be assholes about it when they got, tapped on the shoulder and said, look, can you just put it up? Right. So instead of getting the police involved and saying, hey, look, we don't want this person to come here anymore. Can we get a trespass, warning or citation for him? Because he is scaring other families. He's scaring kids. Okay, cool. That would have resolved the situation. No, what Metro is saying now, and this is public testimony, I mean, they testified in favor of it and said, this will allow us to essentially let people know that we don't want concealed carry, even if you have a CHL, on the zoo grounds. So now the zoo's big, right? And we know about mass shootings, although, as being a forensic psychologist or within that, field or whatever, I also understand that mass shootings as a whole are a very tiny number compared to other shootings. Now, but what this does is that at this point in time, once this passes, I am not going to be allowed to conceal carry at the zoo anymore, even though I've never done anything wrong. Right. But in HB 2005, what it does is that if you do get caught with a concealed, with your firearm, you can get a misdemeanor or Class A misdemeanor for carrying in a public space or in a public building or adjacent ground.
What is the penalty for the Class A misdemeanor?
Oh, I don't remember. I had it written down somewhere. I don't remember. But I would have to look it up. But I mean, it's the point. Is that why do I go through all of this, right, to get a license to conceal carry? I go get the training. I do, all the things that are, fingerprinted and picture taken and all the things, right? All the things that they're wanting to do the exact same way with the permit to purchase, which, by the way, is racist and was introduced in, I think it was South Carolina or North Carolina that had it. They had a permit to purchase and it was specifically for Black people.
Yeah.
So that they
could have a literacy test. You know what I mean? Like
exactly.
Spell xylophone. This isn't like, what I mean? Like anything.
And that's what I mean is that like now I'm like, okay, so do I tell my child that, hey, I really don't feel comfortable going to the zoo because I don't know if I can protect you guys. Right. Even though my daughter loves the zoo. Like, do I go to the zoo and then maybe potentially have to face a situation where I cannot protect her or at least attempt to protect her?
I think that we've hit on so many things on this conversation. I apologize for getting emotional. Some of these topics they're so, never
apologize for that.
They are so
yes.
I was talking to my wife the other day. My wife is white, and we were talking about something, and she goes, "Well, we could just move." And I said, "You don't get it." I'm like, "There's nowhere we can go." I'm like, when it comes to racism, and when it comes to like systemic issues, there's nowhere that we can go. No. I'm like, it's like if there's a hum in the back of your refrigerator, you can drown it out, but like you always know it's there. And a lot of our existence is just dealing with this like trauma and this pain. And when white people go like, I wish you'd quit bringing it up, I wish didn't have to bring it up. I wish Like, you don't think I'm tired of this shit? Like, you know what I mean?
Tired of it. Like, I mean, it's interesting learning about all this stuff, right? But I'm like, man, this was really literally just 60 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, this is just insane. Like, how is it that my dad was born in 61, right? And he went through went into the army when they literally had, KKK members just riding right along with them. And I'm like, how is this even possible that we are at a point where we can have, people scream anti-racism all day long, right? And calling everything and anything racist, but when it comes to gun control, nah, that's not racist.
All good.
Whoa, wait a minute. But then at the same time, we also have, nobody's teaching our children that, for example, there was a Mississippi farmer, Hartman Turnbull, I believe his name was, who, essentially said, like, he used his rifle to protect his farm and his family, right? And that was in Mississippi. And he literally just said that I really wasn't being, I'm not being non-violent, right? Just because I'm just trying to protect my family.
We're working and living. Like, I'm not trying to start anything. You know what I think is crazy? I hear all the time. This is where we're going to end this conversation. I hear all the time. What can we do? Listen, here's my suggestion. When it comes to gun legislation, here's a very simple fix to appease both sides of this argument. At the end of every legislation, the phrase "in the commission of a felony" should be applied. So you cannot have an AR-15 with a 30-round magazine or more in the commission of a felony. You cannot have a handgun magazine of more than 10 rounds in the commission of a felony. You cannot have a firearm on government property in the commission of a felony, and so on and so forth. Now, whatever gun control that anti-gun groups want to pass that makes them feel better,
right?
Knock yourself out, because it doesn't apply to me, because I'm not a felonious individual. However, if someone does break the law and you have this gun legislation that is now written in the commission of a felony, you give them mandatory sentencing. So in the commission of a felony, magazine over 30 rounds, mandatory 30 years. You get a year per round. Okay. In the commission of a felony, handgun, more than 10 round magazine, you get however many rounds you have, mandatory. This is the easy and simple way. If it's not about taking guns from law-abiding citizens, if it's not about creating laws that ensnare law-abiding citizens, if it's not about your simple hatred for firearms, that is a very easy compromise. But I barely graduated from high school, and I can come up with this. But those people who graduated from Yale and Harvard and Columbia, those people that are in legislative office, those people that are ensnared with Moms Demand Action and all these groups that live in all of these highfalutin places, they can't come up with that. So that tells you right there that it's not about stopping criminal activity. It is about the eradication of gun rights, because ultimately the Democratic Party wants ultimate control so they can push in a socialist agenda. And if we're armed and we understand the historical context of the Second Amendment, which has nothing to do with hunting, then we might potentially push back on that. So they have to disarm the public and get people so behind that, because that is the only way that they can usher in that agenda. And I think that that is diabolical. I think that is sick. What you and I have done, we have talked here, we have gone over more history in close to an hour and a half than most people would ever care to even walk down that road. But you said something, and I think that is so important. We have to be the gatekeepers of this history. We have to have these conversations. We have to share these conversations. We have to talk to our children. We have to do every single thing that we can do to get around other families that have children, because I don't agree with people talking to kids outside of their families. I don't know where that became a thing. That's a different conversation. But with the blessing of families, we have to be having these conversations in small groups and large groups and helping people to understand. I want to give you the final word before we get off here. Any last thoughts? And then if you have any social media, if you have any organizations that you would like to share with everybody, I'm going to give you the last minute here and let you kind of sign us off. Okay.
All right. Well, yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think if we can, I guess, just like you said so wonderfully and beautifully, just be able to have conversations, because I think right now it is really more about drowning out individuals and voices that are not, voices that we don't want to hear, I guess. And it is really not that difficult to, sit down and have conversations. And by the way, it is also one of MLK's nonviolent principles, is to hear the other side. So if you're going to practice nonviolence, I would suggest that we actually come together and really do practice nonviolence in the way that it's supposed to have been done. I am extremely appreciative of you having me on here. And I am working on a project, and it's going to be called Black People You Should Know. And it's going to include a list of people that we typically don't hear about or read about or learn about in school. And my hope is that one day I can actually, create some partnerships with people within Portland and other areas to connect with high school kids potentially, who can then help research some of these Black figures that we don't really hear about. So that's one of my big projects that I'm working on currently. Other than that, you could probably find me on Facebook or LinkedIn. Just type in Alisha Overstreet, and other than that, I don't have anything else.
Awesome. Good deal. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today, having this conversation with me. And this has been great dialogue. I think that, this is a conversation that needs to be had amongst other people, other demographics. And hopefully moving forward, you and I can work together and try and push this cause forward. And
let's do it.
And definitely, this is something that we need to do. So I really appreciate it. This has been very, very good. Turned into a therapy session, but it's been good time.
Hey, I'm not licensed, so
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I can't help you there. I'm sorry, but
good. Okay, since you've admitted that you're not licensed, don't bill me. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Good deal.